You have to be a certain age to remember the shining path, whose demonic exploits through the 1980s spilled an ocean of blood in Peru. They were a response, as I'm sure we're about to learn, from brutal dictatorship. They were a response to brutal dictatorship, a response to genocidal, racial policies of mass suppression of the indigenous people of Peru. They were a response to the looting of Peru's very considerable wealth by a tiny oligarchy of exploiters. They called themselves Maoists, although China had by then long abandoned the political positions espoused by the Maoist Sendero Luminoso, shining path. It turned out that their leader was not in the bush, in fatigues, fighting the oligarchy, but was living in a flat above a cafe and working as a university professor in the capital, Lima. But he had many supporters who used to plaster the lampposts and the walls as far away as Glasgow in Scotland, because I saw them there, inviting us to make the earth shake until the leader of the shining path, Alberto Guzmán, was freed from the Peruvian jails. He never was. He died a prisoner in the last week. So let's hear more about that from a leading Latin American figure here in Britain, a man who is himself Peruvian, Isaac Bigio. Isaac, welcome to the show. How was my summary there of the phenomenon of the shining path?
Well, Abimael Guzmán, he was a teacher, but in Ayacucho, and when he was in Lima, he was in a clandestine way, no? But effectively, shining path killed tens of thousands of people, babies, women, peasants. And in reality, what Shining Path opened was the door for a military dictatorship, because it was the terror made by Shining Path that opens the door for Fujimori in the 90s to become the most neoliberal regime in democratic Latin America. No? So since that time, all Peru has been privatized. The workers don't have too many rights in Peru. And that is because of the Fujimori said we need to repress the terrorists of Shining Path. Now, Abimael Guzmán died in jail after 29 years in jail. He died on the 11th of September. And at this precise moment, there's a discussion in Peru because they wanted to incinerate his body and throw away into the sea. So worse than with Bin Laden, but when they did that, they threw the body of Bin Laden in the water, was in a military action where the USA was occupied or entering Pakistan, against the international law. But in this case, the guy was 29 years in jail and they wanted to incinerate. But Shining Path have a double action because on one hand, they kill a lot of people and they give arguments for the right wing to repress the labor movement and the people's movement. But then when Abimael Guzmán was in prison, he completely changed his line. And then he said, I want to support an amnesty for everybody, even for Fujimori and Montesinos and all the torturers and paramilitaries. We are not going to fight against corruption because we want an amnesty for everybody. So he changed completely political line. Now he's dying, not as a man that was like a Che Guevara fighting for his ideas, but as a man that asked his supporters to be in favor of the freedom of all the former dictators in Peru.
They killed 80,000 people, it's thought. Who did they kill, Isaac?
Well, the official version is around 70,000 people, half of them killed by Shining Path, and the other half for other forces, especially by the official forces. But sometimes some of the killings that have been attributed to Shining Path was not made by them, But there is a lot of people killed, a lot, I think that Colombia have more, but Colombia have more than 1 million, but 70,000 people in Peru, half of them made by Shining Path is too much, But the worst crime for me that committed Shining Path was not only the crimes, which are terrible, but was that they opened the door for a neoliberal and corrupt dictatorship, because, before Shining Path, nobody was going to privatize, nobody wanted to implement a Thatcherist kind of neoliberal policies. Peru had was not so socially polarized, but when they captured Abimael Guzmán, they privatized absolutely everything, and Peru is more expensive in terms of water, electricity, and gas than Britain. And the wage in Peru are how much? Less than 200 euros per month, less than 180 pounds per month. So I think that the worst that Shining Path created was they made the possibility that Fujimori took power, make a neoliberal regime that had lasted 3 decades in Peru, and they used Shining Path as an excuse to repress the movement. And now we had elections in Peru, and for the first time in 200 years, because Peru is independent on the 28th of July, 1821, Peru elected a left-wing president, who is a poor guy, a teacher. His name is Pedro Castillo. And it was the most polarized election you can ever imagine, George, because the Fujimori said Castillo is a terrorist, he's Shining Path, he's a communist. I have never seen an election so much polarized, with so much slanders in my entire life in any country. But Castillo won by a little margin. But now the opposition made by Fujimori is trying to push him to adopt a hard line against everybody everybody. And they want that Castillo cremate the body of Guzmán and threw away its body into the water. No?
Do they have any remaining base? Is there still any armed remnants that didn't listen to the self-serving pleas of Guzmán to end their struggle? Or is armed struggle in Peru over for good?
I think that the armed struggle in Peru is over for a long time. There is only a small remnant in the jungles, which is about some tens of members, which is a split group from Shining Path, that they say that Abimael Guzmán is a terrorist or is a terrorist, a genocidal, and that they don't attack civilians. They only attack army officers. But it's so small, that group, so small that they don't have a press, they don't have a political positions, they are only defending the production of coca leaves and the trade. But most of the political party of Abimael Guzmán said, we don't want armed struggle, we want an amnesty for everybody, even for Fujimori and Montesinos. Fujimori was a terrible dictator. He's the only former president in the Americas that has been extradited from another country to put in our country and is served in jail, perhaps until he dies. So Shining Path is in favor of an amnesty for him, for Montesinos, who was the intelligence, who was like the Peruvian Rasputin, who organized the killings of people, of young people. They are in favor of amnesty for every paramilitary and every corrupt politician. So it's a very strange political line. So the supporters of Abimael Guzmán are very, very few in Peru. And I think that the right wing is trying to inflammate the spectrum of Shining Path, because the idea of them is the following. If we create a monster, which is terrorism, we can attack more the labor rights, the ecological rights, and we can open the country for more multinationals, and we can escape corruption scandals, because most of them are extremely corrupt.
And what the origin of the political, what's the ontology of of the Shining Path. They called themselves Maoists. This was quite unusual in the 1980s, and China had long left behind much of Maoism. How authentic was this Maoism?
Well, you have to understand one thing. Peru is the most oriental Western country. We have more than 1 million Chinese and Japanese that arrived in Peru as replacement of black slaves. No?
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, yes, and we have a Chinese daily paper, a Japanese daily paper, our Chinatown is perhaps as big as the London one. So, and we have a lot of Chinese words, Chinese food, and so on and so on. So, first of all, and the second thing is that Peru was the center of the Maoist movement in the Americas in the 70s. We have like more than 10 or perhaps 20 Maoist parties. So what happened when China break with the wife of Mao Zedong and the so-called Gang of Four, most of the Maoist parties in Peru supported Beijing. Some of them supported Albania. But there was one group that said, we support Mao's wife, and we are against Deng Xiaoping. So they were a genuine Maoist group, but they were against the change of line in Beijing, and they started to attack the Cuban, the Chinese, and the Soviet embassy, because for them, all of them become social imperialists, revisionists, and they make that incredible, silly people's war, because when the Communist Party of China started its war in 27, it's because after they were smashed by the Kuomintang and a military dictatorship. So they went into the mountains as a way to defend themselves, but they were a mass party. In the case of Shining Path, they were against the trade unions, all the rest of the left, and they entered in armed struggle just the very same day of 17th of May, 1980, of the first election after the military dictatorship. And they, instead of creating a liberated area in Peru, like in China, Mao, they didn't have like that. They create terror everywhere. So they tried to build its party through terror against unions, against peasant organizations. And at the end, this movement was not viable, and it were destroyed. And the only thing that they helped to create was a right-wing, neoliberal, anti-terrorist dictatorship. No, the only dictatorship in the Americas after the opening of the democratic elections.
Fascinating. Isaac Bigio, thank you for that tour of Peru's political history.